Hello, Culture Matters Podcast. You are in for a special edition tonight. I'm real excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, here's a quote I stuck right out to me. I picked just for this podcast. Being healthy consists of having the same disease as everyone else. Robert Sapolsky. Our guest today, great friend of the Culture Matters Podcast, a regular as it relates to all things contracting, tile, artisanry, philosophy, thinking. Uh, what could very well easily be considered outlierish behavior, philosophizing. We here at Culture Matters. It's funny when I say that we here. I just think it's great and normal and cool. Our purpose here is to uncover the genius of our guests with the goal to make you, the listener, your curiosity cool. I haven't said that in a while, but that really is why we do these podcasts, and I'm very excited to introduce or reintroduce a repeat guest, Nathan Merrill, back to the show. Thanks for coming back, my friend. I loved our last episode. I believe it was episode 694, Beyond First Person. Thanks for coming back.
That was great. Great to be back on the show. This is episode maybe six or seven, maybe eight, seven or eight that I've been on now at this point. Maybe seven. I can't quite remember, but I'm excited to be back on the show. I
I,
appreciate you calling me an outlier in that way. That it's such a warm compliment. It makes me feel all special on the inside because synonym for that would just be a weirdo or a strange person or uh, but I'll take outlier because now I'm connected with Malcolm Gladwell at least.
Yeah, this brings up I for anyone that's listening, if you want to go on the YouTube and go to the video, you can see what I'm looking up. But I actually do want to say, what's the definition of outlier? That actually makes me curious. It says a person or thing situated away or detached from the main body or system. A person of or thing differing from all other members. See, and I look at that as a very positive, constructive. Is the word concentric that
Concentric,
useful?
I think
I got it.
concentric, I believe, would just be like a geometric term, uh, symmetrical rings, concentric rings, something like that, perhaps.
Yeah, you're right. Common center. Concentric is from Latin. Concentricus. Tricus. Come together. Center. Circle. So concentric things have a center in common, or denoting circles, arcs, or other shapes which share the same center, the larger often completely surrounding the shorter. Yeah, but see, there's something I'm pulling out here with this concentric thought. It's like,
Hmm.
what if one of the ironies of being the outlier is that's the center, that's the logos, that's the truth, that's what was once an outlier, then becomes the center, the
It
center
could,
of attention, the center of, like it reminds me
yeah.
of the Schopenhauer, all truth is in phases. First it's ridiculed, then it's
Hmm.
rejected, or first it's rejected, then it's ridiculed, then it's accepted as truth. Schopenhauer, something to that effect.
Yeah, well, I make no claims to be that really special in terms of paradigmatic shifts, but I do like concentric. Also, if you think about maybe something pyramid shaped or conically shaped. What would a cone? Think about a cone. You've got a tip on a cone. There's sort of concentric geometry there, but statistically speaking, if you were to slice that whole cone into vertical planes, and then figure out the area of that vertical plane, as you move toward the tip, then you're going to have something that approaches maybe a bell curve of sorts. And so you've got this idea of an outlier being something that is less and less frequent, something that occurs less often. And so for the outlier to be something that's of value to society, it has to be maybe something that's conically shaped. It's moving into an area where there's few individuals who travel, but it's still concentric because it's connected to the mass itself. It's connected to all things. So maybe it's a good complement in that way. Because this idea of being an outlier and concentric in that it 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 very closely um, walks hand in hand with just a crazy person, or someone who's slipped into psychosis, perhaps, or perhaps the science of culture in the day is not enlightened enough or awakened enough to recognize it as not um, psychosis.
I wrote this down. I want to throw Aristotle in the equation here in a second, but I want to read this first. Outlier in parentheses today. So it's I drew like a circle, and then the center of or truth of tomorrow.
Mhm,
So like what's an outlier today could in the future be accepted as the new truth. Right? Like that's what came to mind. Like
yeah.
there's a temporal aspect to this.
Hmm.
To this fool or to this madness or to this divergent thinking, this
Hmm.
anomalous novelty. It's not yet been integrated or synthesized or accepted into the culture. This new idea, concept, personhood, whatever, you know.
Hmm.
So there's a past and there's a future. So like the outlier of today becomes the center of or the fulcrum of generally accepted principles or generally accepted. Here's an example. I was taking this I'm taking this course on transformation personality. Aristotle said no great mind has ever existed without a touch of madness. However, some say that this quote may have been fabricated by Seneca. Well, that's interesting. We should unpack that too. Just go back to the Peterson thing for a second. Personality and transformation on the Peterson Academy. Um, oh, I just lost my train of thought. Where did that go? It was about
Well, the individual as the fulcrum for future understanding and change for society.
yeah.
The outlier, the individual who's eccentric or that sort of thing. And then you were attempting to connect it to personality transformation. I don't
Yeah,
know where you were going. You
no.
didn't finish the thought.
Yeah, that's exciting. Because this very rarely happens, but there was somewhere I was going with that. Um, damn it, maybe it'll come back. Yeah. I've dropped we were playing hot potato and I just dropped the potato and now
All
who's
right.
gonna pick it up? It's really
Yeah,
hot.
well, if it's like 10 minutes from now, that's fine. 10-minute rule.
Sure, no, but
Yeah.
you know, man, it's like this personality lecture. I swear it was the personality lecture. It was, it's completely blank. Yeah, nothing. Blank space.
Yeah,
Hmm.
well, you were talking about the temporal nature of it too, which I found fascinating because the idea of temporality in my mind is always connected with scale. And so all of these things in terms of what the individual person, because the individual person is a node of awareness within a species, and a species is a node of awareness within an ecosystem, and so on and so forth. So all these things are connected to levels of scale temporally. That would be within the physical domain, but then you also have the temporal aspect connected to cycles of time, depending on how we want to think about time. And so while a person might be thought of as a futurist in the way that they think, in reality, I don't really think that knowledge, not necessarily knowledge, I don't think that how am trying to say this? I don't think that the interdependency and the functionality of all things is in any way dependent on where we are in that cycle of knowledge. In my experience, the things that I feel and understand and have intuitions about are no new things. Many of them feel like ancient things.
Mm.
They're types of gnosis and pneuma that feel as if it's connecting me to to the real gravitas of everything. You see what I'm saying? So it's an individual who society can be so myopic in their outlook
Mm.
that here's a person that's like, oh, this guy is way ahead of his time. It's like, well, maybe, or maybe he's just in tune with reality in a way that a
Okay,
civilization
that's
like
where
ours is
I want
not.
to throw this. Help me make sure I'm following you. The person may not be ahead of its time. They may be closer to time than the other person.
Or the essence of time, or time is a tricky thing to come close to because, but yes, whatever that arrow of existence is, or the animation of
Like
existence.
one of my driving forces of learning is I want to push the boundaries. I want to get to the starting point in my lifetime.
Mhm,
Meaning, how do I say this? Right now, and the whole planet, there's like there's got to be an how many universes, right? Or how many dimensions of reality are happening simultaneously right now on this planet? Like we're not all
mhm,
experiencing the breadth of reality. This obviously the same breadth of reality. Some people are living the truest version of truth as it relates to where our species is technologically, to
mhm.
where it is material from a materialistic standpoint, to where the species is.
Right.
And I don't know if this is right or anything, but it's kind of an intuition or a I'm grasping. It's like and I want to try to get to the truth. It's almost like a dramatic example. If there are aliens, I want to meet them in my lifetime.
Mhm,
Right? That's kind of like a hyperbolic example of what I'm
mhm.
trying to say, a thought experiment.
Right,
If there
right.
are aliens, there's a certain percentage of the population that knows they exist, has interacted with either them or some type of technology that they had created. Like they're experiencing what's available to us as our in our species at the
Mhm,
maximum level. I think I'm experiencing the information opportunity experience of our species nowhere near the maximum level. So when you say what you just said about, in a sense, tapping into the transcendent or the reality,
mhm.
maybe that speaks to like, is that kind of similar to the conversation?
Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
another,
I
you're
think
like looking at it inwardly. I'm looking at it outwardly, though. It seems to be a theme in our conversations.
a little bit. I think that it's contextual. It's all very contextual in what the node of consciousness is A, capable of, and two, intrinsically motivated to attune itself to. All that consciousness is a spot, a geographical spot that is all nodes of consciousness are bounded by their own physical limitation. And so you geographically are a spot of enlightenment in existence. And the scale of that, the extent to which you will see reality and then in turn interact with it is it's influenced by an infinite number of factors. And so where your mind would see that experience is going to be always determined by the history of your consciousness, number one, and number two, the specific manifestation of your consciousness. I mean, you're Jay Duran with one human brain, like that's it. So anything that you can experience of the intrinsic nature of existence or the intrinsic nature of anything, of an idea, of uh, let's apply it specifically to your business. The extent to which you can experience the intrinsicness of a business principle is going to be directly connected to all of those contextual things in your life. Um, I I like the idea of how do I want to word this? I like the symbolism of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve in the garden, because there's something about that whole interaction. It's so strange how it's connected with this tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it's a two-edged sword type thing. It's like it's there at the center of the garden, which is strange. God tells Adam and Eve the tree of the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil you're not supposed to eat or you'll die. And in Genesis it says it was in the midst of the garden. So back to this concentric idea, at the center of a garden of life, which is what it was gnosis, was knowledge. So it almost makes an idealist out of you. It almost helps you to believe in transcendent ideals. I don't want to talk about transcendent ideals because all of that can become contextual too and have to do with these dimensions that you were talking about. But anyways, to answer your question, our brains aren't necessarily that different. They're just structured in different. We're running different softwares, perhaps, but we have the same physical hardware, really. Um, but the softwares that we run, I've found the brain to be extremely malleable, and you can recode it, and you can plug different softwares in. You can you can attune yourself to different types of experiences.
I want to read this quote to you. I'm going to share. I sent it to a friend the other day. Get your thought on this. In some remote corner of the universe, poured out and glittering in innumerable solar systems, there once was a star in which clever animals invented knowledge. That was the highest and most mendacious minute of world history, yet only a minute. After nature had drawn a few breaths, the star grew cold, and the clever animals had to die. One might invent such a fable and still not have illustrated sufficiently how wretched, how shadowy and flighty, how aimless and arbitrary the human intellect appears in nature. There have been eternities when it did not exist, and when it is done for again, nothing will have happened. For this intellect has no further mission that would lead beyond human life. It is human, rather, and only its owner and producer gives it such importance, as if the world pivoted around it. But if we could communicate with the mosquito, then we would learn that he floats through the air with the same self importance, feeling within itself the flying center of the world. There is nothing in nature so despicable or insignificant that it cannot immediately be blown up like a bag by a slight breath of this power of knowledge. And just as every porter wants an admirer, the proudest human being, the philosopher, thinks that he sees on the eyes of the universe, telescopically focused from all sides on his actions and thoughts. Friedrich
Hmm.
Nietzsche.
Well, I don't want to disparage anything against Nietzsche. What I would say about that, and this is not a contradiction to anything that he just said. Um, I agree with all of that, except his Nietzsche, I believe, struggled with the idea of. So let's think about the word knowledge. Knowledge in the tree, for instance, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden, was in the center of the garden, but they couldn't interact with it. And if they interacted with it, they would die. So death is a termination of something. Each moment that we live is experience, it's their state changes. There's state changes from moment to moment, and those moments can be sliced down infinitely, we'll say. Well, maybe to the quantum level. And I suspect that there's beyond the quantum level. So as small as we could make those moments, we can take reality into a chronological experience. That's a very traditional way of looking at reality. So death comes in because it's a termination of experience. It's interesting how that with knowledge comes death. Knowledge, when you think about what it is, it's memories. It's the remembering of states. It's the remembering of of experiences in the world. And so our brains have this capacity to encode within themselves, and I believe it's for the perpetuation of life. We encode slivers of reality into our consciousness. And
Mm,
it's funny, what we call it is remembering. Well,
mm.
think about the word remembering. You're or recognizing, recognizing. You're bringing something back to the experience of the mind that is no longer there. It's a state that has passed because the only true thing that you can experience is change. That's all that reality
Mm.
is a continual changing of everything. There's nothing I don't want to say physically. There's
So are we
nothing that
bringing the past synthesis of pattern and phenomena
we're making
into we're projecting it into the future. We're projecting the future. We're
it
projecting like a probability of
most
change.
likely. Yeah, yeah. On a very simple level, now this all has to do with layers of analysis. On one simple layer of analysis, it would just be for the benefit of the species. It would be for the benefit of life. But that's a very zoomed in view. Um, we think about what it is. It's the remembering. It's the bringing of past states back to the self, right? And so it's a unity. Before they ate off of the tree, there was I guess the idea is death wasn't there. There were no changes of state in the same way that those changes of state occurred after knowledge. Knowledge, though, is this abstract, ethereal, ephemeral thing, though. But it's not a thing. It's a real thing. And the strange thing about this not real thing is how it shapes everything. And so,
Oh, I
all
love that.
the
Yeah.
thing that Nietzsche was saying, it all sounds true until you get down to the very basis of it and you realize that everything is fractal patterns. From on any layer of observation, you're viewing these fractal patterns. And when I say fractal patterns, what I'm saying is everything emerges according to a completely harmonious order. Like there's everything of reality is functioning always. It's
Is it
never
a
not
song
functioning.
and is it a song and you know, the story of our life is either in the notes or not?
Well, music is not just in the notes, it's in the blank spaces, and more of it would be blank spaces than notes.
Mm.
Um, so it's the patterns that emerge, and we become enthralled with the patterns that emerge. And back to the earlier thought, the level of analysis. Um, some people want to look at cosmic patterns, some people want to look at biological patterns, some people want to look at psychological patterns. The point is, though, is beyond any knowledge, at the termination of logic, you have you have the void, and the void is where pattern emerges from, and that's a very strange thing. Um, those are the kind of ideas that Nietzsche was really wrestling with. Um, emergence is this is a emergence is the thing that fascinates me, and observation. The more that you observe things, the more that you recognize that everything is a present emergence, and it's never not been that. Reality's never been the past, and reality will never be the future. Those are constructs. Those are those are abstracted ideas. All that reality is an emergent moment. It's always that. It's like, I don't know if you remember a few podcasts ago, I said to you that the human experience is only I. There's only first person, and this experience is a sliver of it. You might think you have multiple perspectives and all that. There's parts of that that you can experience, but when it's really analyzed, all that you have is the emergence of something seeing something. And that's a strange thing. That's what reality is. It's consciousness is the emergence of something looking at something else and then scratching its head and wondering what is it that is happening. And from that, everything literally is downstream. Everything of the whole cosmos is downstream from an emergence of something.
This is this what where Peterson's, his emphasis on attention and having an aim stems
I
from?
think that's one of his very Eastern thoughts with the eye and the focus of the eye and how that really its ability to focus on something is very attuned to a real small, spatially, a very small thing that it can see. It's a
I have
point.
this belief that he's deeply Nietzschean, and that's
Hmm.
part of the reason he hasn't professed a belief in anything outside of the belief in beliefs being representative in action and
Well,
interaction.
what
And
he says that I really love is
okay,
he acts as if there is a God. There's no
the,
better way to boil that down when you really dig into it.
the acting as if there is a God, that to me, um, demonstrates. I'll go back that he's trying to synthesize Nietzschean thought through Jungian, like the Jung. He's trying to take Carl Jung's work further
Yep.
and not. But like I don't. I think he's not fully understood. I think he's put himself in a position like he's foreshadowing the next whatever that is.
Hmm.
Because the people that believe in him don't understand him, and the people that hate him don't understand him.
No,
He
yeah, he's
actually,
very
I
deeply
don't think he
misunderstood.
actually fits. Yeah, I don't think I think he's in the early stages of building a cadre of disciples for something else. For some, I think he is a Nietzschean. I think he is a Nietzschean's Nietzschean. I don't. I think there's a lot of irony. I think he's a. I'll go so far to say he's like the postmodernist.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I haven't talked about this on any level yet,
mhm.
but I've been thinking about it for some time, and the reason I bring that up is, um, I think he has to the theologically inclined. It doesn't matter if we can like argue that our beliefs, right?
Mhm.
He's about I act as if there's a God, right?
Mhm.
That 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 that's not it's not about just action. There is
Right.
this the words have to leave one's mouth. Like you're in AA. You stand up and you have to tell everybody, I am an alcoholic. That's if you don't say that, you're not in AA. Now why? So
Mhm.
I would argue that he's not what the people that identify with him, and I'm not saying this in a conspiratorial or an anti-Petersonian stance.
No, they
I'm
don't get
saying
him
this
though.
as a student of Peterson and his is that I think he's a Nietzschean. I think he's more than just a Jungian. He's like a some denomination of Nietzschean thought and attempting to integrate
Mhm.
his thought in a and that's where I want your feedback in a it's not theological though it's something else.
Well, Jung, I think that you're right. I would say two things. I would say three things about Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Jordan Peterson. In my estimation, they're not cosmological enough. I think that they're all pointing at something, a world that to the individual node of awareness, to the individual human being, um, there are there are harmonic. experiences that open up when you connect all of what they're saying beyond the anthropomorphizing, beyond beyond the hyperbole, because Nietzsche and Jordan Peterson just speak in so much dramatic hyperbole. But beyond that, there's an ability to um, adopt, if you will, a more cosmological approach to these things, in within which all the things that they're saying are true, but it's not like the nature of that truth is so deeply dependent upon consciousness as it has emerged through humanity. And that's when I say I don't think that they're cosmological enough. I think that the things that they notice and the things that they say are absolutely true, but where where perhaps their thoughts have not gone far enough is in, I would say, the happy union of larger fractal truths, larger ideas of God that are not so anthropomorphized. And that's the issue with him not being understood, is those who don't like him, they're going to anthropomorphize the things that he says times 100, and those who follow him are going to latch on to the things that are anthropomorphizing ideas that they haven't grappled with enough yet. And so he's an individual that is articulating ideas that people want to understand. And I don't think that he lacks intellectual capacity to do what I'm talking about. I just think that you're right. People don't understand him, and you can't. You can only take the culture, the mind of culture, so far before you're really talking about
Mm,
paradigmatic shifts that change everything about how species operate. And
mm.
cultures don't just do those things overnight. And so a lot of those, I, I do wish he would write more about things that interest me, the nature of consciousness and all of that. This is where I also think Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, they can't quite get their thoughts aligned in a way that is satisfying to me, because well, Jordan Peterson is too busy anthropomorphizing God, and Sam Harris is too busy um, trying to get everyone to believe that it's just a present emergence and nothing more than that. And so their thoughts can't come together, which is a shame because they're both so like magnificently brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, it's no, that's
I want you to elaborate more though. I feel like maybe I wasn't following you
oh no,
exactly.
I
Enlighten me in ways that I wasn't understanding what you were saying.
I don't feel I don't think I was not understood. I think
Okay.
I mean I'm not quite I'm kind of thinking out loud as I'm talking. I haven't verbalized this
Hmm.
speculation really. So I'm not even sure I'm following. Meaning um okay, this I want to make sure you can interrupt me if you already did say this, but the the idea of our beliefs being representative in what we do, and that revealing our degree of faith, for example.
I don't actually know that it's strange that you should ask that because civilizations around the world vary greatly in their belief systems. How they structure the software of their mind is vastly different around the world. And yet, when we look at what humans do as a species, there's emergent patterns that if say you were an alligator and you developed a prefrontal cortex, and or something closer to that, maybe an octopus, and you developed a prefrontal cortex, but you live in a different world altogether. Above the water is like that's stratospheric, that's the outer atmosphere, that's space. That's where the aliens are. And if you come up with this newly developed prefrontal cortex and you're awake, you're alive, you're now a node of consciousness that can is self-reflexive. You can look at something and you can say, what is it? And so now there's a demarcation in reality. You can make a construct in your mind. Once you can make a construct, you can now start to construct civilizations in the mind. So you're this octopus, you come up and you look at the species and they put you in a plane, they fly you around the whole world, and you look at all the civilizations of the world. You are not going to come away from that experience and say something like, well, your beliefs will be demonstrated by your actions. What you are going to say is there are emergent patterns within the species. There are forces which drive them to behave in ways that most of them do not understand. And those forces are Jungian. They're very Jungian. But like I was saying, people anthropomorphize Jung and all those ideas, including Jung himself. I don't think his notion of the forces were cosmological enough because it's just a big, vast universe.
Mm. That I think we are then coming to the same place, which is that our beliefs are also what we think we believe that may not ever make it to practical
Mm-mm.
interaction.
It might
If
that this is where art is important though,
okay,
because
okay, go ahead.
art will art shapes the mind, art shapes the software. And so we might say that that's the beliefs will shape the action, but in reality, the beliefs might not shape the action. But what the beliefs will shape is the aesthetic of the simulation. And when the aesthetic of the simulation is manipulated in emotional ways, now behavior is affected. And so aesthetic is everything, setting is everything, the environment is everything, because the environment will have an overwhelming influence upon you that most of the time you're not even cognizant of. You lack the ability to be cognizant of, but your behavior now will be reflective of emotional states. And those emotional states, these emotional intuitions
Like
that cause us.
here's where this is piggybacking on your point. Jordan leaving the institution and developing
Mhm,
his own uh proves not proves it proves too the 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 point of what he's fighting against, in the sense that
yeah,
it
yeah.
because if he believed what he believes in actions representing beliefs, he would just he would not have left, he would not have spoken up. I don't think he would have done anything. I think he would have just died on his cross, like, meaning just been a, a passive, a passive, uh, a passive, victim of the cultural conflicts of the time. I think by him standing up and speaking up and doing all of these things since, I think that there's a degree of irony in the sense that he's acting out the Nietzschean, you know, in a sense, his Jungian, whatever it comes from, the idea of the transvaluation of values. I think he's
Yeah.
embodying the idea of the transvaluation of values by not professing Christ or professing some monotheistic God as his savior, but by psychologizing the literature and embodying the literary lessons in his speech, in how he shows up and how he's navigating the anxieties of the battle of ideas. I think he's actually embodying and modeling the Nietzschean transvaluation of values in real time as someone that has not professed his belief in God.
Hmm.
And so the
So there's
irony is that he's actually the postmodernist just because he doesn't
yeah,
identify as a woman or as
yeah.
a hermit or as a, purple cow, doesn't mean he's not on the side of the transvestite or the, you know, whatever, LGBT plus, whatever, whatever. The mere fact that he's not, and this is what I think is so fascinating about the whole phenomenon. The left having either, not getting him or overlooking him. And then the farther you go left, maybe having disdain for him, the labels that have sprung from that, like, well, that I disagree with. I don't think he's transphobic, misogynistic, any of these things. But is he a representative in some sense of patriarchy and so on? Well, in some sense, but he's a much bigger representative, I would argue, for postmodern ideas.
Hmm.
And the right, or let's say the conservative leaning, well, he's not representing a monotheistic religion. He's
Yeah, they don't.
representing a strain of monotheistic
Mhm.
principles in the values, not the vocalization and the conceptualization and the dogma or the euphoria of the belief structure. So the
Mhm.
right that or the conservative tranche that supports him, that they don't really know what they're supporting.
Uh,
So I don't think he has really any followers yet. And that's
Who
my
didn't?
opinion. That's my opinion of Jordan Peterson's zeitgeist, or the zeitgeist of Jordan Peterson. It's like he's like he's a secular priest.
Of
I don't know.
sorts.
Just
Yeah.
help me out with this. I just I think it matters that he doesn't. I think it matters that the biggest theologian of the times is not a theologian.
Mhm. Well, these are all terms. There's a lot of ways we could talk about that. I think it's ironic. I think you're right. He's the postmodernist, postmodernist. He's a rebel without a cause that he is aware of. You know what I mean? It's he might be. He very well could be
Part of
aware
me
of
feels that he could be just trying to like make sure his family is taken care of and like
exactly.
they're
That's
not all
exactly what I'm getting
homeless. He
to.
truly is a capital. Sorry, truly is a
Right. So there's the
capitalist of the
pragmatic.
highest
There's
order.
that's right. That's what I'm getting at is
He probably
there's a
just thinks
certain
he's
kind of
insane.
he does
He
to himself.
probably just thinks he's insane.
Oh, I'm sure. 100%. There's no doubt in my mind that that's the case. I could give you a million reasons as to why, but I that's true. But it's fine though, because that is the place where those who are trying to know the unknowable land. That's where you land, and that's Alice
Oh,
in
that's
Wonderland.
cool.
That's the place where it takes you, and it's a manageable sanity. And the reason that it's a manageable sanity is because the node of consciousness that arises, it only is around for 70 to 90 years. So it's fine. And that's why the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom in that
Oh,
regard, as a singular node of consciousness, is healthy for the species. And so when I talk about fractal things going on, the things going on a larger scale, it's like, well, it doesn't really matter because he'll die, and then the body of knowledge will kind of move along in the way that those bodies of knowledge move along, and interesting interesting things will continue to happen to our individual species. But beyond that, you brought up the aliens and all that stuff. There is knowledge that is innate in our universe, and what the innate knowledge is doing is, that's the question that takes you down the rabbit hole.
why do you think he recommends Beyond Good and Evil so much?
Because it's such an energizing book. It is the type of book that gets you thinking about these things. You don't necessarily have to come away from books with belief systems, but you should come away from books with your consciousness having been expanded. And books like that expand your consciousness. They're not dangerous. They're only dangerous to the ideological mind who is looking to rule the world. If you're not an ideological mind looking to rule the world, then they're only going to serve to expand your consciousness, which in the grand scheme of things may or may not make you suicidal, like Nietzsche, or crazy, like Nietzsche, or whatever. But what does that really matter at the end of the day? If that's what the species is trying to get itself to do, to understand existence itself, that's what we are. We're little crazy machines. We're little crazy computers that we run the software, and we run it hot our whole lives and then we die, and the species itself is doing something. And so we have it, when scientists want to understand the flu and that sort of thing, they go and they study mosquitoes and they study malaria. And the reason that they do it is because there's billions of mosquitoes with trillions and trillions of malarial cells, and they can see with these unfathomable amounts of data what's happening. How are these things developing? And now that we're entering into kind of a quantum age, this whole universe will open up in ways that
How much of it
will.
is more out like, let's say, faith, a consequence of I've gotten so far into hell as it relates to what I'm ashamed of and have guilt around that
Hmm,
subordinates me as it relates to the culture, the community, that if I don't believe, I'm never coming back. Or if I go so deep, it could go the exact opposite. Like so a certain percentage of the population will self-justify to stay in hell as a consequence of coping with the anxiety as a result of shame and guilt, having strayed from the culture. And a certain culture, as in what's like on the aesthetic or on the surface, acceptable, hierarchically motivating and reciprocated, rewarded.
mhm.
And a percentage of the population, faith or a belief in something awesome, something greater, that's the psychological coping mechanism, pa- anesthetic or panacea to the same shame, guilt, right? So the farther I go in hell, the closer I am to heaven relative to the
Mhm.
conceptual agreement of the
Right.
eternal. However, a percentage of the population, the farther they go into hell, the more they
Right.
embody hell as a consequence of coping with those same very consequences of
Hmm.
the shame,
Hmm.
the guilt, the low the you know the low resolution emotions as a consequence from being separated from the culture, separating from it. And it's like,
Here's a question about that. In the Bible, David said that he said, "If I make my bed in hell, thou art there." So let's apply this question to the idea of God. Wait, to answer your question, it depends on who you are that goes into these places, because people have very limited frameworks about who they are. If you, Jay Duran, decide I want to explore deeper into this, then it'll destroy you, because the node of awareness, the 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 type of awareness that you are taking into that experience is ego. It's something that is designed to live in your body and stay in your body and experience your reality literally around you. Like that's what your body is experienced to do. The issue is the mind, once it's awakened, that's that double death thing. Like you eat something, but you die. The mind is not necessarily limited in the same ways. The mind computationally is limited, but it's not limited in its exploratory capacity of patterns. And so, to answer your question, it really depends on who of you is there. How did you get there? Remember, Christ willingly died on the cross. And in the willing taking of that death, into hell he goes. Now, theologians debate the literalness of how all that took place, but the symbolism is there. He's an individual that came out of that place and ascended, but there was a willingness associated with the consciousness that he was taking into the experience. So I would say really it depends on who of you is going where and why.
hmm,
And beyond those notions of narrative, there's another type of awareness and experience that is simply curious. And I would say that's God, the all seeing, the omniscient, the omnipotent, the all knowing. How can God be there without it having that type of destructive force on him unless he has embodied all of what it is? And so when he is in it, it's nothing but a recognition of himself.
oh wow.
So Young had a quote about that too, which was uh, no tree can reach into heaven whose roots don't go into hell. Um, that's a I don't
It's one of my
recommend.
favorites.
I don't want to say I don't recommend. I If people don't understand how to explore the depths of their own self apart from their own historically shaped models of reality. The hardest thing for a human to do, I believe, is to possess the ability to put their historically shaped model of reality to the side and run a different software. Because the hardware that we have is really capable of some stuff, but it all depends on the software that you're running. It'd be like, my children play the PlayStation 5 upstairs. It'd be like if I went and got The Sims, like the original Sims from 1993 or whatever. I don't know when it came out. And like told them all that this machine can do is run this game. That's a severely limited experience of the capacity of that hardware. And so where people struggle ideologically because the framework of their software, it just can't take going into certain experiences. It's not what the species would allow for the normative
I think
existence.
some of these thinkers, whether it's Sapolsky or Schopenhauer, unless I'm just misunderstanding all of them, which very well easily could be the case, they're making claims that morality, right? Schopenhauer, the base of morality is compassion, or morality is a way for us to deal with people we dislike. Sapolsky, like we have different nodes of existence, or slivers of reality, as you would put it, eyes brushing up against different eyes or slivers of reality that have different hardware
Mhm.
at varying
Right.
capacities of at varying capacities. I'm sorry, at varying actualities of software.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, of the
Right.
integration of software. So you
Mhm.
have different hardware, different software, and then different integration of hardware and software.
Mhm.
If that's the basis of morality,
I don't know that it's the basis. I so a tree has roots that don't tap into one source of anything. A tree has roots that tap into a substrate which branches. The roots
interesting.
branch, and then as it reaches, it branches. That's on one level of observation, but as you dig into that, what you'll find is everything is always branching so that it can interact with its environment around itself. And so I don't know that we could
Like
root
we're
morality.
inextricably linked to our brethren, our brothers and
Yeah,
sisters.
well, and we're inextricably linked to sources of morality that are beyond A, B, or C. It's not like here is the source of morality, this little cup of whatever. It is an emergent phenomena with roots in all of reality, because that's how all of reality is. There's nothing that is not connected to
It
itself.
doesn't just help us survive from a naturalistic standpoint. It has in maybe impelled us to transcend a naturalistic survival mech
I,
cap- sur right, a naturalistic survival precondition. It's helped us transcend it. I mean, it's linked to
if we
economics, is
assume,
linked to I'm just like
Mhm.
assume
Well,
what?
that's what if we assume that progress is progress.
If
You
we
see what I'm
assume that
saying?
progress is
If
progress,
if we assume that is progress, then yes, there is a certain compulsory factor to what civilization does. But that what the compulsory factor to what civilization does could be ultimately completely irrelevant to what the cosmos is trying to do. We could be an aberration. We could be a blip. We could be a thing that pops up as a thought experience for a much grander hardware. So you're talking about bumping into hardwares. Our hardwares are limited in every single way. All that we can do with our hardwares is try and identify at the shit at the outline, at the extremes of our hardware, what patterns do we see?
Well, and then
Because
this is
then
where the
perhaps,
relationship where society comes in, because is all of
mhm,
this just me actualizing at a varying capacity relative to uh, based on my own autobiography? And what limitations are placed on my autobiography as it relates to the culture that I am thrust into? And the
it,
probability, I get to have this conversation with you because in the
mhm,
governance structure of this society, you know, I could have said seven different things unintentionally undermining the governance structure of another society, and I'm in
right,
prison
right,
already. They're at the house, they're right outside the door.
right.
I get
Yeah,
to philosophize around the potentialities of my individuality and of our culture and of our reality of our life within the
yeah, but the thing,
context of this governance structure of this culture that we're a part of.
right. And so that's where we place our consciousness. But the deception there is in thinking that awareness specifically there is an end all be all. Because the thing is the governance structure of your heart could just stop, and then that's the end of
Mm.
that. So there's different governance structures that are attached to all things. And so we talk about the Jordan Peterson thing. What is he really up to? I would think he's up to what he thinks is best, as best as
Mm.
he can interact with all these governance structures. Really, all that I'm saying is
Yeah.
existence is such that when you observe it, when you observe all these different strains, these governing factors of what reality is, your conclusion, if it is anything other than there, the necessity of faith is real, then you're just not looking close enough because the influencing factors upon all things are just innumerable from the top to the bottom. There's we talk about governing structures. We could ramble on and talk about maybe 10 different governing structures of the cosmos, and they would go into all these different arenas of why things work the way that they work. But at the end of the day, it's a drop in the bucket of it's a drop in the bucket of all of what's happening. Like none of us know all of what's happening
He's
or
he's
even
not a
remotely
he's
close.
not a politician or a philosopher. He's I'm sorry. He's not a theologian or a philosopher. He's a psychologist and a politician and a damn good psychologist and politician.
Mm,
I admire him greatly. I'm a student of Peterson and I'm a
mhm,
student of those he's cited, Nietzsche and Solzhenitsyn and
mhm,
Dostoevsky and everyone I can get my hands on. So these aren't statements of this personal attack or
mhm,
disrespect with intention. It's trying to address what's really going on beyond all of it. And I think
mhm.
that he's a postmodernist, and I'm interested to see what the next 10 years plays out as.
Yeah.
And I guess what I want to make sure I'm following your earlier thought, this idea of emergence, this idea of about you were saying the differentiation between his argument that belief is represented in our actions. You're saying no, belief is represented.
Mm. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And
Exactly.
that is a
That is
constant.
reality. It's a constant. It is reality. That there is the actual observation of truth. And that is the Eastern idea that people just don't get. They don't get it. It's a
But
Schopenhauer.
what we believe has consequences that we all have to live with.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. There's a cause effect. There's an interplay of all of this, and we have to live with it. But the nature of living with your decisions is variable. The nature, like you could become a psychopath and you could sleep at night. You could go kill 100 people and sleep perfectly fine at night if you run the right software. not the right. You get what I'm saying? You could slip into
Run
a
a
state of
software that
awareness allows for such things. And I'm saying that the mind reality proves to us that that is possible because that is the example. That is what sometimes happens to people. And so what you said is very poignant. The belief is, right. It's not the belief is represented because even there, the
that's why I'm saying that
linguistics of
his
that.
or go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, the linguistics of this idea of acting. Well, for the Jungian, well, you should really think about the terminology because an actor is someone this is very Greek, right? Why do you think the Greeks had the comedy and the tragedy masks, right? The comedy and the tragedy masks had to do with the person as they're manifested in the
This
world.
is the thing
Who
about
are
the
they?
acting. The
Mhm.
acting is a call to self-awareness. Okay, my actions are congruent with my words and my thoughts. But the question becomes temporal. For how long? Because self-awareness
To what
undoes
extent?
itself.
Right.
Self-awareness is
It
not
does.
finite. It's not a state. It's a
Right.
ideology.
Well, no, well, I would say it is the undoing of all ideology. Self-awareness is the thing that undoes the self.
And so it's not self-awareness is the pathway to the transvaluation of all values. It's a
Uh,
foreshadow to if I understand listen, I might not
well, we
I'm
can
not
connect,
clear
right?
that
We
I
can.
understand transvaluation of all values. When I think of that, I think, okay, Nietzsche failed to explain it because just like he talks
Well, this.
about the idea of the Ubermensch, that's something for the next species, the next iteration of the species to figure
Right.
out. His life
Right.
story, his autobiography is exemplary.
Mhm.
I'm not going to finish that thought. The I lost where I was trying to go with that.
Well, you said something very poignant, and that was it. Well, I'm trying to think how you worded it. At the end of your sentence, it ended with the transvaluation of values, right, through the self awareness, which undoes
Oh yeah.
self. But then the question is if that is the case, then how does society and civilization and the species continue to be as it is? And that's where I'm saying you have to become more cosmological in your outlook. And you have to recognize the power of the forces and the power of the universe, the power of energy, the power of all things. Like that's when we get
So in
really
the
down
future,
to
in
the
100
brief.
years from now, identity breaks down. There are all the postmodernists today that
I
are,
don't
you
think
know,
that it will. I, I I don't think that it will break down. Here's why. The hardware we have itself has biologically emerged within this symmetrical being that I am, right? And so the scale of what's in my brain relative to my beingness in the world, whatever is connected to that thing beyond the transvaluation of values, it is still bringing forth us in this form. And so we could change all of our software all that we want, but the process of evolution will still
well, I
take
guess the concern
however.
on the right, or let's say the traditional monotheistically rooted
Mhm,
conceptualization of or the software of like software
mhm,
that
mhm,
right those hardware slivers of reality operating from the fear outside of the general disgust maybe from just
mhm,
that being an alien software isn't the fear that there's a virus, the metaphorical virus in the software that ultimately the underpinning or the impetus for this identity subjectivity, this infinite subjectivity, it has an unspoken let's say self-destructive element that taken to its extreme destroys the entire culture. But outside of
well,
that, let's say it's not a virus. Let's say it's just another operating system of software to emu to man I'm sorry, to embody so the same software is embodied with a different software
mhm,
and people are productive, people are acting out these virtues that the philosophers have articulated for millennia, then in 100 years, is anybody going to give a shit? Maybe not. And then and then it becomes so anyway, that's just like the question. I think that the conservative element or the monotheistically the monotheistic religious that operate Western society, I think there's an inherent fear in their reaction to the
Right,
postmodernists, that the postmodernist ideology,
right.
that it is an ideology and not a philosophy.
Mhm.
And I think there's an
Well, you
important
hit,
distinction would be that they're worried that there's a virus in that software that it's going to destroy itself and everyone else, or everyone else and itself, right? Destroy the culture and itself. That's the fear. That's where the reaction comes in.
mhm.
Outside
So
of the
here,
general disgust and like
right.
what
I, the,
fear based on novelty, and I'm
right,
talking specifically to the identity, the
right.
subjective, like the nihilism, the nihilism turned subjectivist. I don't know all the terminology around like constructivism and all of that post-structural,
Right.
but I'm still learning it. But like,
Well, what I would say is that society up to this point is not operating on that paradigm. And so any fear that it may have has arisen within a software existent already. So
yeah,
I'm not afraid of the future in
yeah,
that regard. It is a very Greek idea with the comedy and the tragedy. When you mention the idea of fear, well, this is a biblical idea. Why is Armageddon at the end? We are not experiencing the end. We are experiencing the very tip of reality, the most recent sliver of reality is where we are. But because it's at the front, it's always felt like it's near to the end because it's closer to the metaphorical end than it was a second ago. And so there's an inherent fear within this conservation, the holding on to. But that holding on to, what are you holding on to? You're holding on to sand that's always slipping away because when you look at reality, that's what you see. So I'm not saying either of these forces are not,
yeah, yeah.
these are the pillars, these are the forces that have shaped everything philosophical, religious, ideological, whatever, political. It's these very forces we're talking about right now. It's fear or comedy. It's tragedy or it's comedy. Um, and that's funny that the Greeks came up with that thousands of years ago. They really were onto the nature of what's what is. Um, Man, there was something else that I really wanted to say about what you were just saying. But it's 10:10, and I know you have an early one.
Yeah, in closing, what do you think our listeners should do outside of take ayahuasca tomorrow?
Well, in closing, what should our listeners do
And
tomorrow?
I feel like I should do a disclaimer. We are not giving financial advice. Past performance does not dictate future performance.
Or
Future,
physical or medical, because I
yeah,
wouldn't give
no,
anyone financial advice. I would
no, it's
say
like, yeah, it's my sense of humor. Past performance does
this
not dictate future performance.
the simplest thing that I recommend for anyone to do. All of what we're talking about right now is compounded because we're not face to face. We are looking at constructs, technological constructs. So that is speaking to the nature of all the things I'm talking about. If someone wanted, whether you're having a good time or a bad time in your existence, what would I, the tile guy, recommend? I would recommend to turn your phone off for 30 minutes. That's it. 20 maybe. You don't need long. And take your shoes off. I'm really gonna paint myself as a hippie here and go outside and just stand on the earth, feel what you are. That's what you are. Feel it and try and imagine it as you, because sooner rather than later, these atoms will be those atoms. And take 20 or 30 deep breaths. That's it. I mean, it's very simple. That's my prescription for anyone that comes to me with any type of woes it's funny because I'm just a tile man, but people come to me with woes, and all I ever tell them is turn your phone off, take your shoes off, and take 20 or 30 deep breaths, and really mean it though, and go
Wow.
from there.
If you're listening to this episode, I challenge you to go check out episode 694, Beyond First Person, our last episode. If you're interested in that one, go back to episode 449, 339, 411, 263, 337, 308, all on the Culture Matters podcast. Hey, where can people follow you on Instagram?
Vision, stone, and tile.
If you're interested in the most exquisite, remember, Chinese proverb, good things are seldom cheap and cheap things are seldom good. Reach out to Nathan Merrill on Instagram for, he'll do maybe 7 projects a year. They'll be between $1 and $2 million. No, I'm just kidding. They'll be high level, high order. They'll change your life. Included in that is the ability to have to get life advice from a deeply philosophical thinker. Thanks for coming back on the Culture Matters podcast. Please leave us a review, and we will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast.